In a movie of your life, what would the audience be screaming at you to do right now? I'm going to say that again. If you were the main character in a movie of your life, what would the audience be screaming at you to do right now? We've all been there, watching a movie or television show, and we just want to jump through the screen and grab the main character, shake them. Say, chase the girl to the airport, don't go down in the basement, look out behind you. Whatever that thing is, you are that main character in the movie of your life, and the audience would be screaming something at you right now. So what is it? What is that thing that is so blindingly obvious from the outside looking in that you are either choosing to ignore or have yet to create enough perspective to see? I want you to sit with that question in the few minutes that I have with you today, and then in the days, weeks, and months that follow. And then I want you to take one tiny action against your response to it. Because that one tiny action could be the thing that fundamentally changes the trajectory of your life. Hi everyone, I'm Sahil Bloom. I'm an investor, entrepreneur, and author of The 5 Types of Wealth. Thank you so much to Guru for having me for this incredible event. Today I have one very simple but maybe somewhat ambitious goal. To make you think deeply about what you want your life to look like. Not what the world has told you it should look like, not what your family has told you, not what your friends have told you, and certainly not what social media has told you, but what you truly want. With that goal in mind, we're going to dive into a discussion of what I call the broken scoreboard. This discussion is not going to be about me, but the things that I talk about in the book that I wrote are very much a manifestation of my own story. So I think it makes sense to begin there. This is a story of then and now, before and after in my own life. You see, I'm born of a quite unlikely collision of two worlds. My mom was born and raised in Bangalore, India. She was the third daughter and somewhat rebellious spirit. Her whole life was mapped out for her. She was going to get an arranged marriage and settle down for a pretty normal, ordinary life. My father was born and raised in the Bronx, New York, on the other side of the world, but similarly had his whole life mapped out for him by an overbearing, domineering father. He was going to go to school, marry a Jewish girl, and settle down for a stable career in academia. Now, fortunately for me, fate, if you believe in that, had different plans. My parents crossed paths over a 2-week window in a Princeton University library. My mom had applied in secret to come to school in the United States, and when she saw my dad studying feverishly for his final doctoral defense, she decided to ask him on a date. She was the bold one, the rebellious spirit, after all. They go out on this first date, and my dad says to my mom, "My father will never accept us." My mom was so blinded and excited by his use of the word us that she completely missed the message. Unfortunately, my dad was right. His father was not accepting of this budding courtship, of the idea of his son, his golden son, eschewing his wishes, pushing back against his wishes. And he forced my dad into an impossible choice. He made him choose between my mom and his family. And my dad walked out the door and never saw his family again. To this day, I never met my dad's parents. He has 3 siblings I've never met. I have first cousins out there in the world that I've never met. All on the basis of this one decision that my parents made, to choose love, to choose to live by their own design rather than by default. I often joke with my dad today that it took him 28 years to make that decision, to live by his own design, to push back against the default path that was handed to him, to carve his own path into the earth. He beat me by about 2 years. You see, the first 30 years of my life were spent marching down a very traditional path to what a quote-unquote successful life looks like. I was a pretty insecure kid. I mentioned my background. I have an Indian mother and then a Harvard professor father. So you can imagine I was getting academic pressure from both sides of this equation. Well, I have an older sister who is extremely high achieving academically. And from a young age, I started telling myself this story that I was not very smart. My sister was the smart one and I was not very smart. These stories we tell ourselves have the power to shape our entire reality. If you tell yourself that you are not smart, I guarantee you will find every single piece of evidence that would confirm that belief, confirm that story, and you'll ignore every single piece of evidence that would refute it. It's called the narrative fallacy. Humans are very good at finding confirming evidence that will match the story we already believe. So as a kid, you tell yourself that kind of story, you build up this insecurity, this internal void. And what do you do when you have an internal void? Well, the obvious choice is you go and look around and you seek external solutions to the internal problem. It takes you many years to realize that you actually cannot solve an internal problem with an external solution, but we don't know that when we're young. So I went off in the pursuit of those external solutions. What is the best way to get pats on the back, those affirmations, those external solutions in modern society? It is to make money, to go and achieve status through professional success. So I went after that. I took the job that was the high status, impressive sounding job. Good for the LinkedIn post, maybe not the job that I actually wanted. And every single year, as I worked in my career, I continued to tell myself that my own happiness, my fulfillment, my contentment as a human being was on the other side of something. Some achievement, some bonus, some promotion, some goal. That I was going to feel like I had arrived after achieving those things. It's called the arrival fallacy. It's this idea that we build up these destinations as being the point where we will feel fundamentally different about who we are as individuals. We're going to wake up and poof, I have arrived. I've gotten that thing, and all of a sudden, all my problems have gone away. My entire life is different. A few weeks ago, Scottie Scheffler, the #1 golfer in the world, gave a press conference where he talked about the fact that winning golf tournaments was no longer fulfilling to him. It sort of shocked the world. It went mega viral. This idea of this person who had reached the pinnacle of their craft, saying that it was no longer fulfilling to them was shocking. But we've all experienced this at some point in our lives. I guarantee you, you've had some moment where you built up something as the point where your entire life would be different. Maybe it's making your first $100,000, your first $1 million, starting your business, getting your first house, getting your first car, whatever that thing might be. We tell ourselves that our entire life will be different, that our fulfillment and our happiness is on the other side of it. Then we get the thing, we feel that momentary blip of dopamine-induced euphoria, and then immediately reset. We feel that familiar dread of never doing enough, of never having enough, of needing to do more. And that was what happened to me. I was marching down this path, I was achieving all of these things that we're supposed to want to achieve, and all along the way, the other areas of my life were starting to suffer. I was winning in this one domain, but the other areas of my life were showing cracks. And for me, it came to a point at the end of 2020 when I had this realization that from the outside looking in, it looked like I was winning the game. I was doing the things you're supposed to want to do. I had the high status sounding job, I was making the money, I was getting the bonuses and the promotions. I was winning the game. But I realized that if that was what winning felt like, I had to be playing the wrong game. My relationships were suffering. My mental and physical health were in disarray. I was drinking 6-7 nights a week. I was overweight. And unfortunately, my wife and I were in the middle of a 2-year struggle with infertility, which was creating strain in our life for the first time. Everything was working in one area while the other areas suffered. And it all came to a head for me in May of 2021 with a single conversation that changed the entire course of my life. I went out for a drink with an old friend. We sat down, and he asked how I was doing. At first, I gave him the pretty standard response. I said, "I'm good, busy." How often have you given that exact same answer? In the last month even, going to a cocktail party, going to any event, someone asks you how you're doing, I'm willing to bet many of you have said some variation of that. I'm good, busy. It's like this pseudo-dystopian status symbol that we must be valuable to society if we're so busy, as if being more stressed, more time poor is actually a good thing. Well, this friend looked at me. He sort of wanted more. I could tell he knew me better than that. So I opened up, and I admitted that it had started to get difficult living so far away from my parents on the East Coast. I was living in California, 3,000 miles away. I had noticed for the first time that they were slowing down, that maybe they weren't going to be around forever. And he asked how old they were, and I said mid-60s. And he asked how often I saw them, and I said about once a year. And he just looked at me and said, okay, so you're going to see your parents 15 more times before they die. Gut punch. I actually had to take a deep breath to avoid an instinctively angry response. But he wasn't trying to be mean or rude or crass. It was just math. The math, however much I didn't like it, said I was going to see my parents 15 more times before they were gone. If they're in their mid-60s, life expectancy is about 80, and I'm seeing them once a year, that's what the math says. That was the math that changed the course of my life. Because in that moment, I had a realization. My entire definition of success, of what it meant to build a wealthy life, had been incomplete. That I was focusing on the one thing at the expense of everything else. So I left. I went home, and the next day my wife and I sat down for a very candid conversation about what we wanted to build our life around, what our center truly was, what our true north really was. And we took a dramatic action. Within 45 days, I had left my job, it was a high status, high paying job. We had sold our house in California, and we had moved 3,000 miles across the country to live closer to both of our sets of parents. And in that one decision was a very important realization, which is that you are in much more control of your time than you think. We had taken an action and fundamentally created time. That number, 15 more times before my parents are gone, it's now in the hundreds. I see my parents multiple times a month. They're a huge part of my son, their grandson's life. We had taken an action and reassumed agency over our own lives. We had recognized that we were capable of taking action to build our lives around the things that we truly cared about, to build our lives around the priorities that we decided really mattered. And that was the spark, that was the catalyst for everything that followed. Because it sent me on a journey to try to understand, why had I fallen victim to this trap in the first place? Because I knew that if I was falling victim to it, this trap of building in one domain but losing in all of the others, that there were millions of other people out there that were experiencing the same. So what did I do? I went and talked to thousands of people to try to understand what was contributing to this in the first place. And what I came to realize is that it's actually quite simple. What you measure in life really matters. The things that you measure in life end up dictating all of your actions. They pull the actual puppet strings in your life. You don't need to look very far to find examples of this. If anyone listening or watching today has ever put on one of those sleep tracking rings or bands, all of a sudden you become the most annoying sleep person in the world. Right? You say, oh, I can't go out, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't have that drink with you, my sleep score. Right? All of your actions suddenly surround the one thing that you can now measure. Well, historically, and as a society, what is the one way that we measure our entire life worth? The one way that we stack each other up, that we think about who we are as human beings? It's money. That is the one thing. And unfortunately, while money is part of building a good life, it is not the only part. We're missing all of these other things. And so what happens to a lot of people, and what was happening to me, is that we march towards what I call the Pyrrhic victory. The Pyrrhic victory is a term given for a story from history, from ancient times, King Pyrrhus of Epirus. He charges into battle with the Roman Republic, a much stronger foe, and he fights this bloody multi-day battle on this open plain. He is victorious in the battle, but loses all of his lead generals and hundreds of his best soldiers. He is said to have exclaimed at the end of that, "Another such victory, and we will be undone." It is the idea, the Pyrrhic victory, of the battle won but the war lost. A victory that comes at such a steep cost to the victor that it might as well have been a defeat. This is not just a random history lesson. The Pyrrhic victory is what we need to avoid in life. And again, it's not hard to find examples of that around you. The Pyrrhic victory is the person who has made hundreds of millions, maybe $1 billion, that we pat on the back, that we celebrate, that we admire, and we ignore the fact that they have 4 ex-wives and 5 kids that don't talk to them. My entire life changed when I realized that that was not a game that I cared to win, that I would never want to trade lives with the people that I was reading books about, that my definition of success, of wealth, was fundamentally different from the one I was being handed. So as I went and talked to thousands of people from all walks of life, young people, old people, asking young people what they wanted their life to look like at 50, at 80 years old, asking old people what advice they would give to their younger selves, what regrets did they have, what changes would they make to their journey, I noticed that 4 themes kept coming up over and over and over again for what contributed to the good life that everyone wanted. Time, people, purpose, and health. Time, people, purpose, and health. Money is sort of an enabler to those, but it was very rarely an end in and of itself. So if we are going to craft a better way to measure our lives, a more comprehensive way to measure our lives, it has to be built around those themes. That is what led to this idea of a new scoreboard to measure our lives around the 5 types of wealth. We all know about financial wealth, but it is only part of building this great life. So we need to measure across this new scoreboard: time wealth, social wealth, mental wealth, physical wealth, and financial wealth. Those 5 collectively create the 5 types of wealth. It is a new scoreboard so that we can measure the right things, take the right actions, and create the right outcomes. Time wealth is all about the freedom to choose how you spend your time, who you spend it with, where you spend it, when you trade it for other things. It is about an awareness of time as your most precious asset, the one thing that you cannot get back. Social wealth is about your relationships, those few close, deep bonds, and then the extension to circles that extend beyond the self. Mental wealth is about your hero's journey, your purpose, growth, and creating the space necessary to wrestle with some of the bigger picture, more unanswerable questions in your life. Physical wealth is about your health and vitality, and financial wealth is about money, but with the specific nuance of one word: understanding your definition of enough. That's where I want to focus the rest of this conversation, on that idea of enough. There's a famous story about 2 American authors, Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller, who were walking along at this palatial garden estate of a billionaire in the Hamptons. They're walking along in these gardens, and Vonnegut turns to Heller and says, "Joe, how does it feel that just yesterday, the owner of this home made more money than your most famous book, Catch-22, made in its entire lifetime?" Heller thinks about it for a second and then replies, "Yes, but I've got something that he'll never have." And Vonnegut says, "Oh yeah? What's that?" And Heller replies, "The knowledge that I've got enough." What did he mean by that? The knowledge that I've got enough. And why did he have the audacity to say that it was worth more than the billions of dollars that the homeowner had accumulated? It is based on one simple truth: that your expectations are your single greatest financial liability. If your expectations grow faster than your assets, you will never feel wealthy, you will never feel rich. You'll just be chasing whatever more the world has told you that you should want. A story that I love that vividly brings this to life is the idea of an investment banker who goes down to this small Mexican fishing village. He's walking along the docks and he comes across this fishing boat with a few fish in it. And he asks the fisherman, "How long did it take you to catch those fish?" And the fisherman says, "Only a little while." The banker replies, "Why didn't you fish for longer?" The fisherman says, "Well, I have everything I need. In the morning, I fish for a little while. Then I go home, I have lunch with my wife and kids. Then I take a nap. Then in the evening, I go into town, drink wine, play music, and laugh with my friends." The banker's like, "You got this all wrong. Here's what you got to do. You got to fish for longer so you can catch more fish. Then you use the money to buy a second boat. Then that boat goes out and fishes. You buy a third boat, a fourth boat, a fifth boat, a sixth boat. Pretty soon you have an entire fishing enterprise. You take your fishing enterprise public, you move to the big city, and you're going to make millions." The fisherman looks at him and says, "And then what?" The banker says, "And then what? Then you can retire and move to a small fishing town. You can fish for a little while in the morning, then you can go home, have lunch with your wife and kids, then you can take a nap, then in the evening you can go into town, drink wine, play music, and laugh with your friends." The fisherman just smiles and walks off into the distance. It's a funny story, but the common interpretation of the story is to say that the banker is wrong and the fisherman is right. But I really think it's more nuanced than that. It is about the fact that the two have a fundamentally different definition of what it means to have enough. It is perfectly okay and reasonable for the banker's definition of enough to be about building something big, chasing this grand ambition, creating jobs, going after this great vision for the future. But for him to apply that map of reality to the fisherman's terrain makes no sense. The fisherman's already living his definition of enough. And yet, that is what we do when we grab our phones, we scroll, we compare our lives to other people. We allow other people's maps of reality to impact how we feel about our terrain. The antidote to that is to get very clear on what enough means to you, what your enough life looks like. And it cannot be a number, because what we know about numbers is that they tend to disappear and reappear on the horizon. There's this famous study done by a professor named Michael Norton at Harvard Business School, where he asked a whole bunch of high net worth individuals, people worth anywhere from $1 million through $100 million plus, how happy are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Then he asked, how much more money would you need to be at a 10 on the happiness scale? Across the board, whether they were worth $1 million or $100 million plus, they all said they needed 2 to 3 times as much. It makes no sense. There should just be a happiness number, right? But that's not how the human brain works. With numbers, we tend to do this mirage, this disappearing act. As we get close to it, it disappears and reappears on the horizon. Your enough life needs to be an actual vision of the life you are trying to build. What is the money for? The things you are chasing in life, what is the life you are actually trying to build with that money? Where are you living? What are you doing? What are you thinking about? Who are you surrounded by? These are the questions that define that enough life. These are the questions that are going to lead to the fulfilling, happy life that you are trying to build. Because when you have a clear picture of what you are actually working towards, what the life is that you're really trying to build, you take the right actions to go and build that life. You focus on the right things. You allow yourself to win the battle and the much bigger picture war. So, I want to end this discussion in the exact place where I began, with this one simple question. If you were the main character in a movie of your life, what would the audience be screaming at you to do right now? And I want to leave you with my own response to it. A few weeks before my book came out, I was in my office working hard on a project, really focused, when my 2.5-year-old son came barging in through the door. 2.5 years old, so he's jumping up and down, throwing things on the ground, just generally being chaotic. And I started having this very annoyed train of thought go through my head. Why is he doing this? This is so annoying. He should really get out of here, right? All of those natural thoughts that we start getting pulled by. But in that moment, I was at my desk. And on my desk, I saw a picture of me holding my son when he was born. And in that moment, it snapped me back to 4 years prior, when my wife and I were in the middle of this 2-year challenging struggle with infertility. I had prayed every single night that we would one day have a healthy child. And here I was in this moment complaining about the exact thing that I had prayed for. And it was a reminder to me of a very important fact. Sometimes in life, the things we pray for become the things that we complain about, if we let them. Only if we let them. Only if we don't have the presence of mind to stop, pause, and recognize that we are quite literally living out our prayers. All of the things that we take for granted today are things that our older self will wish they could go back and do, and things that our younger self dreamed of one day doing. So my call to action to all of you is to start thinking about that. Start recognizing that the good old days are happening right now. A philosopher named Sam Harris once said there will be a last time for all of these things in your life. There'll be a last time that your kids ask you to tuck them into bed. A last time that your parents want to go on that walk with you. A last time that you get together with that sibling for that annual date. A last time that you get that old group of friends together for the annual trip. There'll be a last time for absolutely all of it. But you'll never know when that last time is. So the choice that we're all left with is to live like it is that last time. To live on a daily basis with an awareness of just how precious these moments and this time really is. To stop saying later. To recognize that later is just another word for never. We constantly say that word. We say, I'll spend more time with my kids later. I'll find my freedom and purpose later. I'll invest in my health and my relationships later. And the sad thing is that later just becomes another word for never. Because those things are not going to exist in the same way later. Your kids are not going to be 5 years old later. You won't magically wake up with freedom and purpose later. Your health, your relationships won't be there for you later if you don't invest in them now. So either we find a way to design these things into our life in some tiny way right now, or we're just going to end up regretting it later. So if you were the main character in a movie of your life, what would the audience be screaming at you to do right now? Go take action against that thing, and I can't wait to see how it changes your life. Thank you so much to Guru for having me for this event. Thank you to all of you for your attention. I can't wait to meet many of you in person in the future. God bless, and I look forward to taking your questions.
That was amazing. Oh my goodness. Thank you everyone for being here. My name is Marissa Stewart. I'm the Senior Director of Integrated Media at Outcome Media. I've been working with Jay for a very long time. So thank you for being here. And without further ado, let's bring Sahil in for the Q&A. My goodness. That was amazing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, before we get started, everyone, if you scroll down, you will get the AI summary of the session. I'm personally going to be downloading that and sharing it with everybody that I know. That was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we got a lot of questions, and so I know we're not going to have time to get to all of them, but let's see how well we can do here. Okay. First one, what mental trick do you use to stay consistent when the results just aren't showing up?
You know, I think there's a couple things I would say here. The biggest hurdle for most ambitious, high-performing people, which, look, all of you that are watching, that are listening to this right now would fall into that camp. You wouldn't be logged into something like this if you didn't consider yourself an ambitious high performer. The biggest challenge facing these type of people is that we constantly allow optimal to get in the way of beneficial, meaning we say things like, oh, I don't have an hour to work out today, so I'm just not going to work out. Or I don't have 2 hours for deep work, so I'm just going to send email instead. Or I don't have an hour to call my mom, so I'm not even going to text her. We allow optimal to get in the way of beneficial, when the truth is that anything above 0 compounds positively in your life. anything above zero compounds. The tiny thing done well is going to stack and grow into your future in the exact same way you see that in your finances and with money, that putting away a little bit of money is going to stack and grow and
Right,
compound.
right,
The same thing applies when it comes to all of these areas of life. So when you don't feel like you're making progress, reset around that. Reset your expectations of what it means to put work forward that is going to drive you in that direction. It can be as tiny as the 5 minutes of journaling that you do that actually starts leading to you to more mental clarity. It can be the text that you send, letting someone know that you're thinking of them. It can be the 15-minute walk around the block when you didn't have
right.
time to go to the gym that day. All of those things are going to get you unstuck. They're going to build momentum. And the reality is that momentum creates ripple effects into every other area of life.
Love that. Another question here. How do you recommend starting to implement positive change when you're coming from a position of burnout and uncertainty?
I've often thought about burnout that, it's not as much a function of hours worked as it is about working on the wrong things with the wrong people. And so I
Right,
think the
right.
first thing I would do is a little bit of an audit of your energy, if you will.
And say like
Go
reevaluate what you're
Yeah, I
you're
mean, go through a week and color code your calendar according to whether things are creating energy versus draining energy, and
right,
people, whether they're creating energy versus draining energy, and develop a perspective on like where you are in that current world. Are you spending too much time on things or with people that are not really contributing to your energy as a person? Because your outcomes will follow your energy. You can work
right.
crazy hours and for long periods of time if you're working on the right things with the right people. And sometimes we just need simple course corrections to the way that we're working or to the people that we're working with, and it can have a dramatic impact.
Love that. Another question we have here. We got a couple on this area. Basically, how old were you or how far were you into your so-called phase when you realized you needed to change? And then just people in general, just kind of wondering like at what phase of life, like can you do this in?
Yeah, I was 7 years into my career. I was a junior partner at an investment fund. I had the trappings of the quote unquote successful life that you would think of. I had a house, I had a mortgage, I had real bills.
Right,
I had real responsibilities. We were in the middle of this struggle with infertility that I mentioned. And so we didn't have children yet, which was probably the one thing that I would say we have now from a real responsibility standpoint that we didn't have then, a rather big one. But look, when I reflect back on this, and this is a lesson for everyone, this whole idea of taking a leap of faith in life is something that a lot of people talk about. You look with the benefit of hindsight at my journey or anyone else's that you would see and say like, oh, they took this big leap of faith. Well, the leap of faith feels really scary when you build it up in that way in your mind. The reality of a leap of faith, though, can be very different. And the way that it can be different is if you are gathering information and creating evidence of your ability to live on the other side of that leap. So you're standing where you currently are. There's this great, chasm in between you. There's like nothingness down below. And then there's a life you want on the other side. That feels really scary because of how big that gap is. You can
right,
close the size of that gap by spending a little bit of time every single day gathering information about what the other side might look like. That's talking to people, that's research, that's reading things, that's listening to things, etc. And creating evidence of your ability to live over there. That's getting your first customer, it's setting up the landing page, it's making your first dollar on the internet. All of those things create evidence to convince you that you are actually capable of meeting your responsibilities. You can pay your bills, you won't starve. All of those
right,
things basically have the effect of shrinking that gap. And so for me, I had been writing for about a year prior to making that big change in my life. I didn't
mm,
know at the time, but what I was doing was I was creating a whole bunch of evidence that I could live a life that looks different than the one I
right.
was currently living. So when I went to make that big change, it actually didn't feel that scary. I was able to sort of tap myself in, give myself permission to go and take that step because it wasn't quite as intimidating as it would have otherwise been.
Love it. I mean, this session was utterly amazing. Unfortunately, we've ran out of time for questions. But again, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to be sharing this with everyone. This was amazing. And again, everyone, please participate in the poll that's on the right-hand side of the screen.